The federal government is unveiling details about its inquiry into deaths and disappearances of more than 1,100 Indigenous women in this country. CTV's Lois Lee now with the details. Lois, what do we know so far?
Well, Aaron, we've just learned that the names of the 5 commissioners of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. They include members of the Indigenous community, of course. Now, the chief commissioner will be Marion Buller, who is BC's first female First Nations judge. There's also Michelle Odette, a former president of the Native Women's Association of Canada. And there are also 2 Indigenous lawyers and a professor of Indigenous law at the University of Saskatchewan. Now, Indigenous Affairs Minister Carolyn Bennett addressed the media during the launch ceremony at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. That is actually happening right now as we speak to mark this occasion. Now, she's calling this an important step in Canada's reconciliation with the Indigenous communities here in Canada. Listen to this.
Coast to coast to coast, it became painfully clear to many that the high rate of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls could not be ignored. From the early days of the NWAC faceless dolls installations to more recently, sadly, when Tina Fontaine, Loretta Saunders, Renelle Harper became names that all Canadians understood and represented a pattern of vulnerability and injustice that had to stop.
Now, Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould and Status of Women Minister Patty Hajdu are also at the event. They will meet with the families of victims. Now, the Indigenous communities have been calling for this inquiry for years. So the previous Conservative government, as you remember, refused to conduct this inquiry, but it became one of the Liberal Party's campaign promises. So today is expected to be a very emotional day for many across the country, Aaron.
Well, Lois, what exactly will the commissioners be studying?
Well, the commissioners will largely be looking at what systemic factors have played a role in the staggering number of missing and murdered women from Indigenous communities. Like you mentioned earlier, more than 11,000 women. Now, in particular, it's expected that the commissioners will be picking apart the Indian Act and examining whether it contributed to an environment of violence against women and the marginalization of Indigenous women as well. Now, the commissioners will also be able to investigate municipal and provincial jurisdictions all across the country as part of this inquiry. And we've just learned today that the 2-year study will cost almost $14 million more than originally expected. The federal government had originally budgeted $40 million for the study, but officials have decided that the extra funds are needed. The probe will get underway on September 1st. Aaron, back to you.
CTV's Lois Lee. Thanks for this, Lois.
You're welcome.